Today we're going to be graphing sine and cosine. So the amp of the parent function of sine and cosine is always 1, and then for the period is always 360 degrees. So let's start off with sine. This is the parent function of sine, the green line, which is y equals sine theta. So you make a table and you put negative 180 degrees, negative 90 degrees, 0 degrees, 90 degrees, and 180 degrees. You plug those in and you'll get 0, negative 1, 0, negative 1, 0. Then you just basically plug that on the graph here. So let's move on to cosine, which is the red line here that represents the parent function of cosine, which is y equals cos theta. And you basically plug negative 180 degrees, negative 90 degrees, 0 degrees, 90 degrees, and 180 degrees, and you'll get negative 1, 0, 1, 0, negative 1. You could either go forward or backward because negative 90 is the same as 270 degrees.
Another thing you need to know about graphing sine and cosine are the horizontal and vertical shift. The horizontal shift is going to be your h, and the vertical shift is going to be your k. And for whatever h states, you're going to be doing the opposite. So for example, sine of theta minus 90 plus 1. And since h is going to be your 90, you do the opposite, which is positive 90, and the k stays the same. So instead of looking at 0, 0, you're going to go to the right 90 and up 1. And that's where your eyeball is going to stay at now. And for the rest of the points, you're just going to plug in what your other degrees are. So for the next, you do 180. So sine of 180 minus 90 plus 1 is going to give you 2. And if you plug in 270, it's sine of 270 minus 90 plus 1 is going to give you 1. So starting from here, you're going to go from 90, 1, 180, 2, and 270 is going to go back to 1. And as you can see from our table. And from our cosine, it's going to be the same thing. Since 90 is going to be a negative, since 90 is positive, you do the opposite, which is negative 90, and your 1 is going to stay the same, which is negative 1. But since it's a cosine, the original you start at 0, 1, but you're going down from 0 to negative 1. And you're going to do what you did with sine and plug in the numbers. So cosine of 0 plus 90 minus 1 is going to give you negative 1. And the cosine of 90 plus 90 minus 1 is going to give you negative 2. And you're just going to do that for the rest of the following numbers.
When there's a coefficient in front of the sine or cosine, the amplitude is affected. The amplitude is a halfway point between the max and the min. First, we're going to look at the sine graph. The sine graph is in green, and first I made a table and plugged in the points. Y equals 2 sine 0 degrees equals 0, because sine 0 degrees is 0 times 2 is 0. And then for y equals 2 times sine 90 degrees equals 2, because sine 90 degrees is 1 times 2 is 2. And you just continue plugging in the points until you finish one cycle. And as you can see here, the parent sine graph is just vertically stretched by 2. Now for the cosine graph. For the cosine graph, I also made a table and plugged in the degrees to get the points. Y equals 5 cosine 0 degrees equals 5, because cosine 0 degrees is 1 times 5 equals 5. For the next point, y equals 5 cosine 90 degrees equals 0, because cosine 90 degrees is 0 times 5 is 0. And as you can see over here on the red graph, the parent function of cosine is stretched vertically by 5.
The period is the distance it will take for a graph to complete in a full cycle. So starting with sine, since as you can see there's a 2 after the sine. The 2 indicates the number that you will use to get your period. So you take 360, divide that by 2, and you get 180. The 180 degrees represents the number it will take for a full cycle to be completed. Anything after 180 will just repeat the cycle again. In order to get the interval, which is optional, you divide that number by 4, which is 45. And 45 indicates the number that you can use to plot on the graph to make it easier to plot. And then for cosine, since you can see there's a 4 after the cosine, you take 360, divide that by 4, which is 90, and that 90 will indicate the period. And as well as using it for the interval, you can divide that by 4, and you get 22.5. The period is going to indicate the horizontal stretch.